We're now going to have our first panel in the round discussion. Bring in the chairs, and I'd like to invite Sean Evers, who's going to be moderating that on the outlook for Asia. Thank you. Seats, please.
I'm going to take the opportunity to invite the panel up on the stage. If I might start by inviting Ms. Nawal Al-Fezai, the OPEC governor for Kuwait, maybe perhaps the next OPEC Secretary General, but Abdullah, please, Ms. Nawal, Fadl. If we could take a seat, thank you. If I could also invite Mr. Matt Fox, if you would, sir, Executive Vice President, Exploration and Production of ConocoPhillips, please. Mr. Jérôme Ferrier, President of the International Gas Union, if you would please join me on the stool. If we could also have Dr. Tatiana Mitrova, please, Head of Oil and Gas Research at the Russian Academy of Sciences, please. And Mr. Keisuke Sadamori, the Director for Energy Markets and Security at the IEA. Please, thank you very much. I think we'll just go straight to the next question while His Excellency Al-Attiyah is leaving. Perhaps he has a job interview that we don't know about. But if we could take the question, your clickers, and this is the outlook for Asian demand and where it may go in the coming period. So Japan's economy has stood on the doorstep of recession for a decade, and now the IMF has for the first time downgraded its forecast for China GDP to dip below 7% over the next 2 years. How should Gulf energy producers adjust their export strategies to accommodate what appears to be the end of the Asia-led commodity super cycle? If we could get a few clickers to the panel, please, I would think that would be useful, that they could vote. But if we could, if people could cast their vote, either one, offer Asia discounts and beef up downstream investments to secure market share, which seems to be happening at the moment. Move swiftly to diversify a customer base away from Asia, so take the opposite approach, or no need to adjust strategy as Asia will continue to be heavily dependent on secure energy supply from the Gulf. So those are your three options. If you might vote 1, 2, or 3, and give us our 10 seconds. Offer lots of sweeteners to Asia, discounts, beef up downstream, move swiftly away, or 3, no need to adjust strategy as Asia will continue to be heavily dependent on secure energy supply from the Gulf. Dr. Tatiana, I'd like to get you to respond to that, given that Russia has just put a major pipeline from Russia into China, which would seem to look at that the Asian consumers are diversifying away from their dependency on the Gulf. Or what are your thoughts? How did you vote on this question?
Well, actually, my vote was number 3. So generally speaking, I think that Asia is still going to be very much dependent on the Gulf oil and gas supplies. But at the same time, I would also join the first answer, because anyway, if you are dealing with Asia, and actually that's what Russia has experienced, you have to provide some discounts, especially with the Chinese buyers. It's absolutely the must. Very flexible marketing position. It's something that they are demanding and that they will be increasingly demanding in the future in this situation of oversupply which we experience. So what Russia did was actually a sort of discount both for oil deal and for the gas deal. And at the same time, one has to realize that Russia's possibilities, export possibilities, are quite limited. I mean, we are talking about the oil pipeline, the gas pipeline deals, but increasing them several times is not on the agenda at the moment. theoretically could happen in the longer term.
So China can't depend that Russia will do 2 or 3 pipelines, that they're...
Anyway, even if it happens, it has to be a consequence of sharp decline of Russia's supplies to Europe. So
right.
Just redirection, mainly due to the political reasons, not due to the economics. And the infrastructure construction is very long. So even with the power of Siberia gas pipeline, actually we are talking about reaching the projected capacity of 38 BCM per annum by 2024. It's 10 years away
right.
when Russia will start to supply these volumes. If one is assuming Al-Attiyah pipeline to happen someday, then it's another maybe 15 years starting from now. So it's not an immediate response. It will take quite a long time.
Now, I'm curious how you voted. Kuwait has been talking a lot recently about getting into a refinery in China. There's obviously large storage facilities in Korea. Is Kuwait putting too many of its eggs in the Asian basket and maybe needs to look at other markets?
Yes, the Asian market is the major market for crude and products from Kuwait. In fact, I go with the answer, which is number 1. There's a lot of uncertainties now in the demand in China and energy and Japan and India. Take into consideration that the efficiency they are taking, measurements the efficiency they are taking, the using of more of coal and gas. So that's why and also there's a lot of supplies. Supplies are coming from other sources from Africans, from Asia. So that's why I think Gulf countries, they have to keep their share in the Asian market, whether by going downstream in the refineries or petrochemicals, and also to give encouragement and discounts to the crude price, just to keep their market share in Asia.
What about new markets? I mean, is there not a potential risk of becoming over-dependent on Asian demand?
What do you mean by new market?
New markets.
Yeah.
Where are the new markets, perhaps?
Yeah.
Well, let's say Europe, South America. Where would you find a new market?
It's not an easy to enter these new markets. Take in consideration distance far. Take in consideration that these markets they have their own historical sources. The Africans, Mexico. It is not an easy.
So Asia is the only game in town?
Yeah, the Asians, because of the historical, the same culture, proximity, a little bit the same culture, it's the traditional customer. So it is easier to deal with the Asian markets than going to a new markets.
Let me bring in a voice from the international industry, Matt, and what your outlook for Asia. If you take just the thesis of this session, as the question is in the program, is Asia a future engine of demand growth or demand decline? I mean, your thoughts?
I would take issue with the premise of the question at the end of the Asia-led commodity supercycle. There's going to be continued growth in Asia. Even in previous price projections before the correction, there was an expectation that oil demand in Asia would grow about 2.5% a year. Natural gas demand would grow about 4.5% a year. We'll get to a place where by 2030, at those growth levels, China will be consuming more oil than the US is. And now that prices are lower, although the economic growth may slow down for to some extent in the Asian countries, the lower price should help to sustain that growth or perhaps grow it further. So I think that there's definitely a long-term source of demand growth across the Asia region, without any doubt.
So the thesis there, the commodity super cycle, which saw oil prices quadruple from whatever $25 a barrel in the early 2000s to 100, are we still in that?
No, I was really responding to a decline in demand in Asia. I don't believe there's a decline in demand in Asia. But on the supply side,
there is a decline in demand growth.
A decline in demand growth, but it's not going to result in demand long-term demand destruction in Asia. there'll still be very significant markets for all of our products.
If I might bring in Jérôme, very optimistic outlook there. Gas seems to be coming from everywhere, supplying into Asia. Is it wise of Gulf producers to see to be so heavily dependent on Asian demand when there is so much gas supply coming from other sources? We see Australia coming on stream this year.
Yeah. Regarding the natural gas, the International Gas Union considers that China and Northeast and Southeast Asia are facing the prospect of a declining energy supply security. The Asia-Pacific region is described by the International Energy Agency as having the capacity of sustaining robust economic growth and to evolve towards a more environmentally friendly energy mix with an increasing recourse to natural gas and renewables. And so I would like to make 3 comments. The more evenly geographic distribution of natural gas and shale gas resources in the world is a risk mitigating factor, and a number of large under-tapped resources in eastern Russia as well as the Caspian region are accessible to Asia by pipeline, while new gas provinces, in particular East Africa, may add to the global LNG production. Second one, the expected growth of the LNG trade market will result in a decoupling of the oil and gas prices, and it is expected that the environmental qualities of natural gas shall be acknowledged in its price. This new LNG pipeline large-scale supply projects should be made economically possible even in a steady regime of relatively low oil prices. So we are confident on the fact that the new wave for the LNG production from Middle East and particularly from Qatar, and even if the local consumption will grow up because in Middle East will have a steady demand for power generation, for local domestic gas production, but the new exports for LNG will be, and we are very confident on the fact that there will stay Asia, China, and Southeast and Northeast Asia will stay the main area for the production in the coming years.
Let me, if I might bring in Mr. Keisuke on this question, and again, as I did earlier this morning, ask you maybe to wear more your Japan hat than your IEA hat in terms of the answer of this question. 60% of the room is saying they don't need to adjust strategy as Asia will continue to be heavily dependent on secure energy supply from the Gulf. Do you agree with that? Is that how you voted? Or do you think, as Nawal said, no, we need to be more number one? Don't take us for granted.
Well, it's actually a kind of a difficult question. I voted 3 as one of the directors at the International Energy Agency, but as I'm originally from Japan, so I would welcome number 1.
Thank you.
Cheaper the better.
Do you think that you would welcome it? Do you think it's needed? Does number 1...
Well, could be needed to a certain extent in responding to the current kind of price developments. But in terms of the kind of a structural demand and supply balance, we consider that even though the Chinese demand growth may be slower compared with the kind of a last 10 or 5 years, but we at the IEA expect that China and other Asia will lead the demand growth of the entire global oil market. We expect about 6.6 million barrels per day of growth toward between the 2014 to 2020, and around 4 million barrels out of that is expected to come from Asia. Probably 1.7 from China and 2.4 from the rest of the emerging Asian countries. So in that sense, even though it could be slower than last decade, but we expect that the China and other emerging Asia will continue to lead the growth toward the 2020 in the medium term. So there will be where the demand grows. So that
is there an opportunity? The President suggested that Asia can develop more of its own energy reserves and resources without being increasingly dependent on the Gulf. Nuclear power coming back in Japan, shale gas in China, which is fairly undeveloped at this point in time, energy efficiency across the Asian Pacific region. Could we see those self-dependence grow further in Asia, and so reducing this heavily dependent part?
Well, I think the picture may be different between gas and oil. As for oil, we don't consider that there will be, unless there's a real massive recovery in some parts, I don't know. Our expectation is that in terms of the oil demand and supply, the Asian regions will need to continue to depend upon the imports from other regions. In case of gas, the supply source is somewhat diverse, and we expect that the very big projects coming online from Australia, for instance. So there will be more the supply coming from that Asian Pacific region. And,
although Dr. Tatiana says Russia can't be depended on to be a big supplier into the Asian market unless it stops supplying Europe.
It's different for gas and oil. You can quite easily divert oil flows. It's not that expensive, but with gas flows, it's enormously expensive to resend gas from Western Europe to Asia. I mean, it's nearly not doable. You have to build so far. All Asian gas exports are based on the Eastern Siberian field, which would never reach Europe in any case. So current resource base, and even though these projects are very expensive and hardly breaking even, so I mean the issue of competitiveness of gas, I think actually for all new LNG projects it's the same problem. They do not fly at $7 per MMBtu, so it's the major challenge for the whole Asian gas market development, how the new upstream projects could fit the market and how they could be competitive in the lower price environment.
Okay, let's bring up the next question, please. The January 2015 edition of the World Economic Outlook, which we've heard about this morning, has projected India's growth to leapfrog that of China by 2016. Can India become the new engine of Asian energy demand over the next decade to rival China? Can India pick up where China is dropping off? Can India rise to be on the scale of China? Yes or no? Over the next decade, 10 years. So giving India a bit of time, 10 years. Vote 10 seconds, please. India's growth to leapfrog that of China, of course, starting from a lower base. Can India come forward? 50-50. That's the favorite vote. What's your thoughts on that, Matt? What is ConocoPhillips betting on? Can India?
I think Indian growth can supplement the Chinese growth, but it's not likely to supplant the growth in China. Is my view. And I think both economies have got lots of room to continue to grow. I think that China is going to be a much more significant market over this period of time than India.
So India's growth over that period, for demand growth versus China demand growth, putting aside where China is currently at, but even on the demand growth side, you would see China still outpacing India.
That would be my expectation.
Right. Anybody else?
Yeah, I think that timing is a key issue. It will take time. Less or more than 10 years, it will take time. But what is interesting from a geopolitical point of view is to mention the two big gas pipeline projects to India. The first one is the API from Turkmenistan, the urged gas reserves, through Afghanistan and Pakistan to India. And the second one is IPI from Iran, Pakistan, and India. And they are moving on, those two projects. And from a geopolitical point of view, it's like the new Russian strategy and policy to China or to Japan. It will be a key issue in the coming years.
Nawal, we see Kuwait looking far east, as we've talked about, but we don't hear, maybe it's not in the news, but India is not on Kuwait's radar screen too much? Or do you see India as a great potential market?
India is a great potential for crude export from Kuwait, but not for the projects, for downstream project. Yes, there was a talk between Kuwait and India for a refinery, but I don't see there is a big potential for to build that refinery. Kuwait, they have project now in China, and yes, it takes a long time to go, but by the end of the day, it will, as I see it, whether for a refinery or for the petrochemical. As I see that China will still grow more than India for the energy demand, because as I see that the China's economic structure, it's more structured, it's more organized than in India. Also, the culture, the technology, it is more in China side, not in the India side. That's what I'm saying.
Do you have any concerns that China could surprise on the downside? Matt, very optimistic about China's outlook, but China has a lot of structural challenges that India has already overcome. It has a democratic structure, it has institutions. China relies on a very hierarchical structure in which there could be weakness. Is that, do you see it?
This is how I see it. Still the economy in India, because it is linked with the culture, it is linked with the tradition, it is linked with a lot of different big population, different languages, different culture. So I don't think it has a strong structure as in China.
Okay. Did any of the panel vote on the yes, 49%, that India can become a new engine? Tatiana?
Here I think it's a problem with the wording of the question, because if we are talking about growth rates, percentage per annum, I think India has a good potential to show high growth rates from the lower base.
Sure.
But if you are talking about volumes, I doubt that it will overcome China in terms of volume. So what do you mean by engine?
If you sort of step outside the strict statistical parameters of the question and just see trend lines, that India could become a much bigger energy consumer today than it is in 10 years' time?
Most likely it will be much larger consumer than it is today, but I doubt that it will overcome China even in 10-year time. But as an engine, so you see, so China is slowing down definitely, and we see it, and all the measures they are undertaking in their energy policy in terms of energy efficiency and also environmental policy, it actually starts to show the results. And India had not reached yet this mature situation.
So, I mean, I think if we asked the same question 30 years ago, 20 years ago, maybe, at China versus Japan, would Japan slow down? Would China overtake? You know, we probably would have said no. China will remain in its shadow, but clearly that has not been the case. Japan has stagnated, China has soared. Did anybody would like to comment who did vote yes, giving a bit of a thumbs up? Because obviously 49% of the room did agree with the thesis. Can we have a representative of the 49, CEO of E.ON?
I think India does have potential. I mean, obviously it very much depends on how they solve the affordability question. Importing gas at world market prices is not affordable for many sectors, and it's just the blend between the domestic gas and the international gas which makes it affordable. So if economy picks up and then the spending power picks up, it needs to go hand in hand. to make it happen. Otherwise, India will fall into a trap of having to import more, but having to debt finance essentially versus the consumers who can't afford the gas. So it is about the structural reforms which are being promoted by President Modi, are they going to happen? And are they going to basically increase the growth of the overall economy appropriately so it can afford gas?
Buried into that question is also the slowdown in China. Do you have any concern at all that China could surprise on the downside? It's now dropping below 7, heading towards 6.
I think if we talk about all the larger projects, we're talking longer-term timeframes. We tend to think of a slump right now that everything is going to collapse and next year we're going to be bullish and everything's going to be brilliant. In the longer term, China will continue to grow. It will not be able to continue on a double-digit as their base growth, as everything, percentage-wise, is going to go down. In absolute terms, it's interesting to see what happens. And I think there is potential for maybe a short dip into the consumption, but on a longer term, I'm not really worried.
Right. Please, Dr. Keisuke.
I fully agree with Tatiana that this depends on the kind of a definition. And we'll see the India kind of growing more rapidly than China in the next decade. But at the same time, we should put the kind of scale into perspective, because what China achieved in the first decade of this century is nothing comparable. I mean, right now, India is planning to invest in a massive amount of coal power generation plants, for instance. But even if we collect all of their 5-year plans that India is planning to build, the coal power capacity, China did that in one single year, several times, in the first 10 years. So in terms of the size, I think what we saw in China in the past 5 or 10 years that's nothing comparable to the other regions like India or Indonesia. And of course, we expect a kind of a slower growth for China, but still our kind of the assumption or the forecast in our medium-term coal market report is that we expect to see something slower, but 2-point-some% of growth in Chinese coal demand. But concerning a question, it may depend on what happens in China. Not only the overall the growth figures, but also if they can somewhat change the pattern of their growth and become successful in depending less on that kind of energy-intensive and steel and cement-intensive sectors, and go more for their kind of a service-oriented economy, I mean transformation or the kind of a rebalancing of the economic structures, then we may see a lot slower growth compared with the kind of GDP numbers.
I mean, we're hearing quite a lot of bullish outlook for demand from Asia, but yet in the previous survey, 55% of the people said they're concerned about demand security. It seems to be that there is an inconsistency in that.
That's pretty close, 51 and 55.
Yeah.
So I mean, I don't think it's an inconsistency.
Yeah.
I think the other big part of the equation is the supply side. I mean, there's a very significant inflection point here in the insecurity of supply, associated with unconventionals, of course, initially in North America. But I think if you look at reserves just now across the world, are 25% higher than they were 10 years ago. And it's only going to continue to grow as people start to export this technology out of the US and Canada into other parts of the world. So although I'm very optimistic on demand, I'm also very optimistic on supply. They have been able to meet that demand and at lower prices than we've seen over the last 5 years.
How did you vote as a matter of interest on that question, if I might ask you? Demand security or supply security?
Well, I found it difficult to vote because I feel good about both. I think there's a lot of demand out there.
50-50?
Yeah.
Lady Barbara, Judge, please.
I just want to say something about the rest of the energy security in Asia, because China is building or starting a new nuclear power plant every week. The Indians are doing their domestic nuclear construction now, and they are sorting out their problems with the insurance regime there. So the new The new construction in India will be in nuclear. Japan, I believe, will restart their nuclear power plants by the end of this year and will come on next year, and so they won't have to buy LNG at the highest price in the world, as they are doing now. The Koreans have just got one of their nuclear power plants restarted again and will continue to buy theirs. Vietnam is building nuclear power plants supported by the Russians, and so I believe that the nuclear source of supply, which will never be more than 10 or 20%, but will be a serious factor going forward, will affect this debate one way or another. With respect to shale, my own opinion is that shale will be part of the mix in China, but only China, because it's the only place big enough to permit that kind of unconventional construction, but that we ought to continue to think that there'll be a mix of energy sources in Asia coming forward.
Thank you very much. Tatiana, if we could bring up the last question, please.
Yeah, so actually I would like to add to this idea, to this comment, that if we are talking about driver of the energy demand growth, yeah, we have to define what energy we are talking about, because hydrocarbons, it's only the part of the solution, and nuclear, renewables, and actually energy efficiency to a certain extent, they can deliver part of the solution, and especially coal. I mean, we are missing this elephant in the Asian room, and coal so far is the cheapest and the most obvious solution for China, for India. So if hydrocarbons are not accessible for some reasons, then it's coal left. And actually, the major issue, especially for gas in Asia, is how competitive it's going to be with the other solutions. So far, gas is losing this competition. And the problem is that even with gas prices going down, what we are observing currently in the Asian market, coal prices are going further down. And coal, so we saw this problem in Europe already, how coal plants are actually squeezing gas-fired generation away. And I'm afraid that if there are no major changes in the Asian gas market, in the Asian LNG pricing, we might see a similar situation when LNG, especially those very expensive projects from Australia, potentially from Russia, from East Africa with a $12 per MMBTU break-even prices, they will still simply not be competitive at all. And gas will not become a part of the solution of this transition like it happens in Europe.
Well, that sets us up perfectly for this question. So if we could vote 10 seconds, what will be the main impact of a lower oil price range on the historic rise of natural gas demand that we have seen in Asia over the last decade? So choose your 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. Lower oil and gas prices will consolidate Asian demand for both for years to come. Lower oil prices will threaten LNG status as Asia's preeminent emerging energy source. 3, LNG exports to Asia will be diverted to more lucrative markets. 4, derail or at least delay plans in Japan to reopen nuclear plants. 5, gas pipelines will displace LNG. So what will be the main impact? Obviously, you could say all of the above or none of the above, but what would be the main? If you could vote, please. And we'll give the final word to Jérôme on that question. Okay. 38. The optimism in the room comes through. Or it will threaten LNG status as Asia's preeminent emerging. 26, there's that 50-50. LNG exports to Asia will be diverted. So 2 and 3 combined give you a majority. They're kind of essentially indicating the same direction. Jérôme, would you like to have the final word on this session on that question and answer?
Yes, I think that we observed that there was, before the drop on oil prices, a relative disconnection between the oil and gas prices. And the result was 3 clear markets, one in the US with a very low price, HH, one in Europe, and one in Asia. After the shock, the last shock, we are observing a convergence on prices and a certain balance between Asia and Europe, even if the gas price stay very low in the US. So I think that probably, and I support the first answer, the first option, 38%, the oil and gas price will consolidate Asian demand for both for years to come. That will be probably an incentive for that. The question behind is, what about the very expensive new project, gas pipe or LNG project, particularly in Australia? Up to now, the builders have decided not to interrupt and not to change their plans regarding the 7 big LNG projects in Australia, but we are seeing that for the project not yet decided, right, with no final investment decision, they will be postponed. It's the same case in North Canada. So that will be impact. But regarding the Asian demand, I quite agree with the first option.
Okay. Well, I think that will wrap up our panel session. I'd like to thank our panelists, Matt Fox of ConocoPhillips, Mr. Keisuke Sadamori, thank you for your comments today and your lecture, and Dr. Tatiana Mitrova from the Russian Academy of Science, Nawal from Kuwait, thank you very much, the OPEC governor of Kuwait, Nawal Al-Fezai, and Jérôme Ferrier, president of the International Gas Union, thank you very much for your time.